Let's bring in our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clarke, for more on this. Professor Clarke, afternoon to you. So the question there is, if Russia say yes, are the Russians likely to accept these ceasefire proposals?
They have got a big incentive to, because with a friend in the White House, is the way they see it, then the best way to exploit that friendship in the longer term is probably to go along with this. But they'll be careful how they do it. They won't want to look as if they've been bounced into it. Interesting what Marco Rubio said just then, because we know, I mean, his view of Ukraine was completely the opposite to the view he's now taken in the administration. But the old Rubio is coming out there. He said, you know, if they don't agree, we'll have to consider that. We'll have to look at it, see what else we can do. This is the sort of thing he might have said about a year ago, which he hasn't been saying until now. It's very interesting, the sort of phrases he used there. But I mean, Steve Witkoff is on his way to Moscow. I mean, we think he might be there tomorrow. And, I mean, Putin, as usual, hasn't said anything. He doesn't usually. Yeah. Lavrov has made some clear statements, and the Russians are rejecting everything at the moment because that's their style. And if they make concessions, I always say, they will make concessions at the 59th minute of the 11th hour. And then they'll say, I don't know how I can live with myself. I've made so many concessions. This is the way they do things. So they are very, very tough negotiators. And we'll see if this American team, who are not used to diplomatic negotiation, these are business people.
He's
we'll see how they get on.
buddy, isn't he, Witkoff?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. It's a clash of two completely different styles. You know, the property dealer versus the really hard-line diplomat. Interesting from an analytical point of view to see what happens.
100%. All right, let's talk about what's happening in Kursk at the moment. Of course, that's a Russian area that the Ukrainians had taken part of. Why are we seeing so much activity there right now, Michael?
Yeah, the Ukrainians are in big trouble now. I mean, when the Americans suspended intelligence sharing on the 5th of March, on the 6th of March, the Russians launched big attacks in the Kursk Oblast. And you can see there the darker shaded areas, what they've taken. Basically, the northern front has collapsed on the Ukrainians. The Russians have brought their best units in, some of them, the airborne, the VDV, and the Marines, the naval infantry. So they've got some of the best troops there. They've got 50,000 of them, including some North Koreans who are not terribly effective, but they're there. And the Ukrainians have got about 10 or 15,000. So they're badly outgunned, they're badly outnumbered, and they were blind with the American suspension over the weekend. And so they're struggling for Sudza. That's the centre of the place. Now, we've got some geolocated footage, which we know is true, of the Russians in part of Sudza. And there's some stuff that's come in that you and I were talking about not so long ago, about some very big bombs landing in Sudza, these Fab 3000, 3-ton bombs, which is plausible if that's confirmed. The point that the Ukrainians have got is that they may have to withdraw. The Russians have attacked south of Plikovo, and they're trying to close the ring behind the Ukrainians in Sudza. Now, that ring at the moment, the bottom of that ring, you see the bottom of that ring, it's about 35 kilometres wide at the moment. So they've still got room to get out. And their flanks are quite short, so they ought to be able to get out in good order. But we'll see.
Well, that's the question, because when this happened, Mike, we talked about them getting out in good order. I remember distinctly. Right. Is that still going to be possible at this point, do we think?
Probably. I mean, but if they took the decision now, they could probably get out in good order. If they leave it too long, or if they think they could fight on for a bit longer, then they may not. But, I mean, what the Russians are doing is exactly what they want to do, which is to snuff out the Kursk pocket, which is Russian territory, before they go into any negotiations. And if the Ukrainians could have made this last another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then they'd have got some benefit from it. But it looks now as if they won't. It looks as if strategically it hasn't done very much good. Did them some good, but it didn't create the strategic shift in momentum that they were hoping for. And now they're faced with the choice: either fight really hard and lose men and equipment, or get out while you still can.
Interesting. Talk to us about some of the drone activity we've seen in recent days. Drones are the predominant weapon now in this war.
Yeah, big Russian attacks overnight at Odessa, a big attack at Dnipro and Kiviri, quite important places. The Ukrainians, of course, had thrown 350-odd drones at Russia the previous night. Interesting, these numbers. I was looking at some drone statistics of the Russian attacks recently. From January onwards, they've been attacking more or less every other night as part of their air offensive. Almost all of their attacks have been drone-only attacks. And they were running at about 150 drones at a time, each attack, and then they went towards 200. But now they've gone to 300 and 350. They're throwing absolutely everything, and about 60% of them are now drones and 30% are missiles. Or glide bombs, which are almost impossible to defend against, certainly given the way that the Ukrainians have had the rug pulled from under them militarily until very recently. So these attacks are intended to be hurtful, and they are intended, again, to put Ukraine into a position where they have no choice but to accede to Russia's demands. But of course, the argument isn't between Ukraine and Russia. The argument is between Russia and the United States and those teams. Back to what we started with. Can they negotiate each other into a position that is somehow acceptable?
Interesting. Well, as Rubio has said, the ball is firmly in the Russian court.
Yeah, so it is.
Right, Professor Clarke, appreciate that as always. Thank you for now.